I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Vengreso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And today I bring you negotiations. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Learning how to really do negotiations correct and win over those buyers. And I've got with me my friend, Mr. Mark Raffan. He is the head of training with Negotiations Ninja, and I couldn't be more excited to have him here with me. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, man. That introduction was amazing. The negotiations was incredible. I love it.
It's like I do with my kids sometimes when I'm doing something scary. I'm like,
You said it with such mystery. I feel like that's how I should get all of my introductions now.
You should have the record that as the voice of God. We're walking up to the stage to present. It's Mark Raffan, and we're going to be talking about negotiations.
That's the way I want it from now on.
Oh, awesome. Well, welcome to the show. Excited to have you. I know you're also a best-selling author as well on the book, 9 Secrets to Win Deals and Influence Stakeholders. And so I'm excited that we're going to incorporate some of that content inside there. If you haven't got the book yet, I encourage you to go out there and get it from my boy, Mark. You'll be very, very excited, and you will not be let down as well in terms of the book. So, Mark, do me a favor. Give everybody a little background about yourself, Negotiations Ninja, and then I've got a very special question to ask you.
Sure, yeah. Negotiations Ninja is a negotiation training and coaching business. We train salespeople and procurement people how to negotiate. Simply said, we take you from unsuccessful to successful when it comes to negotiations.
That is the quickest, fastest, shortest, and most succinct messaging around the organization that I've ever heard from any guest. You clearly are very familiar with your ICP, the problem that you solve, and who you help, and make it be known, all of you listening in right now. I want you to hit rewind just whatever it is, 1 minute, and re-listen to Mark's messaging on how he introduces his company, the problem they solve, and who they help, and he does it in 1 to 2 sentences. That's what we've all got to get to. Very importantly there. So, all right, very good, Mark. And a little bit of background about yourself, how long you've been doing it, what did you do beforehand, etc. So
I'm actually a procurement guy by background. I come from the dark side.
Wow, you're the guy that we don't want to mess with.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, this is why this is so exciting, because you get to see the inside of the devil's lair.
I love it. Well, yeah, you're the folks that we always like, we got to get to procurement. So we got some good stories that I'll share with you here on procurement. But look, all right. So dark side, you're from the other side of the fence, now teaching sellers how to get through people like you.
That's exactly it, man. I mean, procurement's a black box, right? You get into these kinds of situations, especially salespeople that have never really had procurement people as friends or had candid conversations. Once it gets through to the procurement team, what do you do? And so we teach salespeople how to be able to deal with that and how to be able to negotiate.
Great. And how long have you been doing this for? And how long were you in procurement prior to this?
15 years in procurement. And then I've been doing this for about 6 years. And in that time, we've become one of the more recognized negotiation training companies in the world. And we deliver training to companies on almost every single continent except for Antarctica. Right, we haven't cracked that yet, but we will get there.
That's the goal. That's the goal for 2024 is Antarctica.
Yeah, it's been a fun time. Love what we do. We love helping people with negotiations.
Fantastic. Well, that's very interesting. And I'm just curious, what was the inspiration behind creating Negotiations Ninja after 15 years of procurement?
It's really, really upset about corporate training in general. Like the idea behind corporate training is it's so boring and it's so unengaging and it's not entertaining. And having sat through so many of those sessions, eventually I just started losing my damn mind. I started losing it and decided this isn't for me. I don't want to do the corporate thing anymore. I can do this better. And so we started Negotiations Ninja.
Interesting. Very interesting story. All right. Very good. And I always ask this question of all my guests, as you know, and I'm very curious to understand. I'm interested. Tell me something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles. And I'm looking for something juicy. You're the procurement guy, man. So, you've got some stories that you haven't shared, I'm sure.
Yeah, listen, I'm ashamed and proud at the same time. I don't know if that's a thing. Can you be ashamed and proud of something at the same time? That I've made several salespeople cry during negotiations. That's both shameful and a badge of honor, I guess. It's not something that I talk about because I am slightly ashamed of it, but it is something that you're like, well, okay, I obviously hit a button there. But yeah, it's something that is not something that I advertise. It's not something that I advertise.
All right. Well, for and those that have hit the button there and that have cried during the training, come on, that's what I say. Actually, I've been there where you're like trying to get through and you're doing practicing. You're like, I never even thought about positioning it that way, right? Where you just get so frustrated. So to be for those that may be listening to this podcast and that have cried as well. That's okay. It has happened to us all. It's a safe place. I won't make fun of you. I won't say to man up. I won't say to have thick skin. None of those things. And I won't put you on the podcast and say, tell us your story of when you cried. Very good. Well, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Let's get into some meat. We've got sales leaders. We've got sales reps. We've got business owners who are obviously focus on driving revenue. An interesting thing, many business owners don't even consider themselves a founder-led seller is who they really are, but they just don't know it. But let's talk about some of the biggest mistakes people make in negotiations. What are some of those biggest mistakes that you've seen, heard, tried, and or observed?
Yeah, look, the single biggest mistake that the vast majority of people make in negotiations is lack of preparation. And I think that's because the media has done us a disservice when we think of negotiation in general, right? Like you look at Wolf of Wall Street or Boiler Room or these Glengarry, Glen Ross type movies where these people magically create deals seemingly out of thin air, and it all comes together because they said some script or a fancy set of lines, or they inflected their voice at the right point. And the reality is, for B2B negotiation especially, that's just not true. The vast majority of negotiations are actually fairly boring, right? They're strategic ways to be able to build and deliver value throughout the value chain between a buyer and a seller. And if you approach it strategically and if you plan it correctly, you can uncover and execute on a huge amount of value throughout the negotiation. It's less about what you say. It's more about how you plan for your negotiations and the strategy that you have going into it. And the biggest mistake that I see people make is that they're going into negotiations without a plan, going, I don't know, I guess I'll see what I can get. And that's a major, major issue.
So preparation, talk about that for a second. Is it preparation on the individual side of what it is that you are looking for and how to overcome those potential objections? Or is it preparation about the procurement buyer, especially in a large organization that you might be dealing with? What do they like? What do they not like? What are their hot buttons? What are not their hot buttons? And or is it about what the expectations are? Because oftentimes what we find, especially in large organizations, you're negotiating with the business buyer who owns the budget, and then they have to bring in procurement, which in most cases serves no value and no purpose, in my opinion. No offense to all my procurement folks.
We're totally going to fight about this.
Yeah. So no value whatsoever other than trying to get more dollars and cents that you've already gotten approved through the business. And so I've never, not one time, have ever had a valuable experience that the procurement team in all my 26 years has ever brought to the table.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear this. This is terrible. This is terrible that you've experienced it that way. Well, let me start with this. Let me start by saying it may be shocking, but the single biggest part of the preparation process, like if we're going to walk through that, is the first step that most people get wrong. Most people don't even know what it is they're trying to achieve, especially in B2B sales, right? So the answer that I get from most people when I say, okay, what is it that you want to achieve from this negotiation? The number one answer is, I'm going to try and get a good deal. To which my response is, cool story. What does that mean? Obviously, you want a good deal. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be negotiating. So what does a good deal mean? And they say, well, I want to make more money. And I said, nice. That actually still doesn't mean anything. So we break down these high-level aspirational goals that they have into more concrete, achievable things. So if you say to me as a salesperson, well, I want to make more money, I would say, cool. How are you going to do that? Like, what are the things that you're actually going to negotiate into the deal in order to achieve that aspirational goal? And we call those success drivers. So it may be selling more seats. It may be cross-selling additional products. It may be upselling additional services. It may be increasing your prices. It may be improving the warranty availability that you have so that there's less serviceability that you have to do. So it lowers your cost on your end. It improves your profitability. It could be a number of different things that you decide to do to maximize, quote unquote, making more money. But most people don't think beyond that one overarching term. There's so many different levers that we can pull to be able to achieve that it doesn't necessarily make sense for you to go, well, I'm going to make more money. And then you try and think of it on the way to trying to get the deal? No, that's a very poor approach to negotiation. And it doesn't just have to be about, quote unquote, making more money. It could be about, well, maybe the goal is to reduce risk. Great. What are you going to do to reduce risk? Or maybe it's to improve communication. Great. What are you going to do to improve communication? There are actual things that you could negotiate into the deal to achieve those objectives.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, something interesting is I think you're talking about negotiations on a holistic scale, and you've got multiple buying influencers and or potential buyers inside of a deal. And I immediately started out the podcast with my anti-procurement messaging. And I love all my procurement friends who listen to the Modern Selling podcast, by the way.
I love that you added that in. No offense to any of the procurement people listening.
And all of those that are listening, I've had a wonderful experience with you. But that having been said, and notice how I did it in a low tone and a low voice, by the way, all those. But nonetheless, just thinking about that process is everything you described is something that we might encounter and or deal with and or have to address with all buying influencers in an account, where it might be the economic buyer, it might be the technical buyer, it might be the actual financial buyer, right? So any of these pieces, we're not just talking about a procurement individual, but I find that some of these areas, now, generally when you're dealing with procurement, it's because you're dealing with a large organization. And that's generally where you'll find a procurement team that sits there. Usually in the mid-market, we don't really have procurement. I rarely ever see that. Sometimes it's outsourced to another firm, but you've got to have some serious coin. And usually it's the individual buyer, and then, of course, they're legal. So are all the strategies you're talking about when dealing with maybe procurement, or is it all buyers in general?
All buyers in general, you can take the same sort of approach, right? Because you want to achieve something in the negotiation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there in the first place. And I think the default position that most salespeople find themselves in, which I'm not necessarily saying is a bad thing, but maybe this is a different way to reframe it, is they're so customer-centric that they think about the customer's needs before their own, and often in favor of their own. Right, in favor of the customers versus theirs. And they often push aside and push down and lose value for their own things that they want to try and achieve in the negotiation in order to make all of their customers' dreams and wishes and happy frilly dresses and butterflies and rainbows come true. And you've sacrificed all of the things that you want to get out of the negotiation. Instead, I want you to be a little bit more selfish. I want you to think, what is it that I want to get out of this, right? Think about yourself first. What do I want to get out of this? What do I want to drive out of this? And then think about the customer. Because as soon as you start thinking about the customer's needs first, with regards to that, you're going to start sacrificing your own needs right away. Now, I'm not saying that the customer's needs aren't important. Obviously, we have to think about that. Obviously, we have to try and create value. That's all important. But don't sacrifice your own needs.
And let me tee off that, which is when you say your own needs, let's define that. Are we talking about the individual needs or the needs for the business to be able to get something out of it? Which are you representing? One or both?
Holistically, right? We're thinking about it holistically. So number one, what are the needs of the business? What are the needs that we want to achieve? Because your needs should never, ever supersede the needs of the business that you're representing. Your job is to fulfill the needs of the business that you represent. Your needs are always going to be secondary to that. I'm not saying that they're not important, but I am saying that they're secondary to the needs of the business. And then you think of them holistically. So for example, let's just say the business is in a situation where they need to utilize unused assets, or they need to enter a new territory, or they're trying to maintain competitive advantage. What are the things that you're going to do to help them fulfill those big objectives, those aspirational goals? What are you going to negotiate in to help protect the territory, to help them utilize unused assets? What are the things you're going to do? Then you think about what you're going to get out of it.
I so appreciate that you said that, Mark, but I think one of the big challenges that I see is that most of our sellers, no matter how large or small the organization is, don't know that because not even the sales leader knows that. For example, when we first started out Vengreso as an enterprise sales prospecting training company, one thing that it was a non-negotiable for any contract that we did, and I literally would walk away from the contract, is we were putting into every single contract that the customer will give a video testimonial, the customer will allow us to use their logo, the customer will allow us to be able to use to build a case study. And all those three things were inside the contract. Now, I might negotiate two of them out, but always have one in, right? And the idea was because as we were building up the company, I did a 7-way company merger with Vengreso, all of everybody who's followed our progress, and we needed to build social equity and brand equity and company equity behind what we were doing and those types of things. So as a default, I told everybody in the organization, we will have one of those three. I don't care which one it is. You choose one, but you find a way to get that inside the contract. Go for all three and push hard to say no, and concede on one at a time if there's something that they want us to do that we concede and say, we'll do that if you, and you fill in the blank. But here's the thing. It's extremely rare, and I spent 18 years in corporate, that anybody in sales leadership had ever told me at any time, here's what's important to us right now. We need logos in the pick an area, San Francisco Bay Area, that are in this particular segment, this particular sector. Go out and negotiate, blah, 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 fill in, right? We never got that. So how, to your statement, you need to identify the needs of the business. Understand that. Who's supposed to be responsible for giving that if it's not given to a salesperson?
Yeah, no, and you raised a really, really good point. I've seen that myself, unfortunately. And unfortunately, that's just poor sales leadership, right? It's the responsibility of the salesperson to filter down that messaging to their salespeople. If you want to enter into a new territory, if your goal is to add more logos, if your goal is to reduce IP risk, whatever the big corporate goal is of the organization, there may be 3 or 4 big ones. If you're not actively filtering that messaging and giving that messaging to your salespeople and enabling them with the things that they can actually negotiate into the deal to be able to do that, then you're failing them, because then all they're going to care about is top line revenue. And we know that at that as a singular goal, yes, it helps the business to grow. Don't get me wrong, but it is not the best holistic approach, because then you are going to start to do things to achieve that revenue that may not actually be in the best interest for the business. For example, you take on unnecessary risk. You don't get the logo. You don't get the testimonial. You don't get the referral. Those types of things end up actually destroying the business long term, or not helping it to scale at the rate that it should. So poor sales leadership here really is the thing to blame for that. And if you're a sales leader right now, and maybe you haven't even considered this, maybe you're going, of course I should be thinking about all these additional things. Don't stress out about it, right? Like, this point of realization is a good thing. That's why you need to think about all of the additional corporate goals. But you can't just tell your salespeople, oh, we want to reduce risk, or we want to enter this new area, because that actually means nothing to a salesperson, right? You've got to take that big goal, that big corporate goal, and say, these are the things that you can negotiate into the deal to support that corporate. Give them the thing that they could do, and then get them to go and execute that thing.
Love that advice. There's one more area that I was thinking of as well, and that is, perhaps it's not we need a case study, or we need to be able to use your logo or a press release, or perhaps it's not one of those things, but perhaps oftentimes, and especially in larger organizations, when you have at least 100 salespeople, usually there's a special pricing team, and that special pricing team internally, that is responsible for making sure that any price point that you put out into the market, it meets the minimum NPV, meets the minimum ROIC, meets the minimum, and whatever financial calculation term that they're using to measure their success of good deals versus bad deals. Yeah. The thing that I've always had a problem with is the separation of church and state. And that is that in the finance world, special pricing team, they don't want to release those metrics and numbers for ROIC, NPV, margin, whatever, that they have to have a target for. And we're always constantly coming back, can I do this price? Can I do this price? Can I do this price? And it's like, no. Why? Well, because it doesn't meet our what's the goal? What are we trying to get to? What are my bottom lines? Well, what can you get? And there's always this tension. And I've always felt like the problem has always existed inside of an organization, not with the seller. It exists with this. Sorry, I'm going to say this. All my listeners, don't be offended. The stupid sales leader who doesn't demand of the CEO to say, finance team, you will tell us what are the minimum metrics. Because if I understand what those metrics are, that makes a good deal, a bad deal, or an okay deal, then I don't know how to go to a customer and say, Mr. Customer, you asked for this price point. Unfortunately, going down to that price point with only 100 sellers, it puts our ROIC calculations, our NPV, our margins, whatever the metric is, it puts it below the threshold, which is blah, 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 blah. And if I actually had 200 seats, then I could probably justify going to this type of price point that would give me this type of margin, and that would make this work. Now, I want this to be a win-win for you, Mr. Customer, and for us. So option A, we stick with 100, and here's our price point, and that's the lowest that I can go in order to be able to make this financially sound for us. Or option number B, you give me 200, and I go down to this price point, and we're able to do. And that, for me, has always been the missing link of the stupidity behind hiding it from a sales organization. Because if I know what I'm negotiating for the company, then I'm going to go negotiate that. But if every time I got to come back in, special pricing, and I'm left in the dark, then it makes no sense, because I don't know what I'm negotiating for. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, amen. Praise the Lord. Like, I mean, I cannot get behind that enough. If your salespeople aren't armed with the range of acceptable outcomes for each of the success drivers that we're trying to achieve, it becomes almost impossible for them to actually generate good deals, because then they just become a glorified realtor. Right? Like, I'm always going back and forth. And if I, as a procurement person especially, am not negotiating with someone who can actually do something for me, I'm going to try and escalate it every single time. right? And if you're pushing me to escalate it every single time, why do you have a sales team? What's the point? So we have to have something in place that allows them to be able to move. Now, that's not just even price, right? That's what we can accept in terms of IP risk. That's what we can accept in terms of limitation of liability. That's what we can accept in terms of brand risk. That's what we can accept in terms of data risk. All of those things have ranges of acceptable outcomes for different types of deals. And I'm not saying that you apply one thing to everything. Obviously, enterprise deals are going to be different than mid-market deals, are going to be different than small business deals. We get that. But if you give them a range that they can operate within, let them operate within that and give them the tools to be able to do that. And once they learn how to move in that range, how to build value and how to protect value, then it becomes much easier for them to cycle deals faster. So your cycle time goes down and you cycle faster and get more deals, which means you're acquiring faster, which means you're scaling faster. So this idea that we don't give the sales team that ammo is bananas.
Yeah. In fact, I would even argue that organizations who have a special pricing team, you're wasting money, right? Because the reality is most of those organizations, if you walked into them, they usually have a financial calculator and they have a discount percentage that sales reps can go. And then there's a floor that you can't go below this. And after that, you got to go into special pricing, which is so stupid to me because you've just created a job for not necessarily needing to create a job. Don't get me wrong, I love creating jobs, but you've created a roadblock internally. Help me understand the financial metrics and terms. Equip my sellers with the ability to have financial acumen, business acumen. For example, I didn't start learning about indemnification clauses, acceptable changes in terms of venues for states, right? Until I got into negotiating $20 million contracts. Prior to that, every single time someone wanted to change the venue from Kansas City law to put it wherever it was, I always had to go back to special pricing, wait 2 or 3 days to figure out whether or not we can do it. And then they would come back and say, we can't do Washington State, but we can do, and then you would have, 2 or 3 states. And it was like, but why? Why did I wait? Why could you not empower me when I'm on the phone with my buyer and their legal team and they say, guys, we don't do Kansas City law, but we will do this. And I know that these states are on the do not accept lists. Okay. And I immediately say, we can't do that, but let's find a mutually agreeable state. Here are 4 states that we normally agree with 99% of our contracts. Delaware, this, that, and the
Delaware,
other.
New York. Yeah, it's classic.
Would that work for you? Okay, we'll take New York. Great. Boom, off the list. As opposed to these red lines back and forth, going to a special pricing team. It bugs the heck out of me on terms of contract negotiations, and it puts the seller in just a paper pusher mode.
Agreed.
Obviously, I got on this soapbox here, bro. I mean,
well, listen, I'll get the soapbox out with you. I'll write down, we'll bring out the book and we'll start hammering the street corners, man. That's the way we got to do it from now on.
I'm going to start wearing the sign.
Whoever will start listening, that's what we got to do.
All right. Another question for you. Most important thing to consider in negotiation. I think I heard you say it, but I want to make sure we tease that out. What is the most important thing to consider in working in dealing in negotiations?
Yeah, so I mean, earlier on we talked about the preparation that you need to go into it, but I think the most important thing that you have to consider going into it is, what value am I creating here? What value am I driving here? Not only value for the customer, but also value for us in the negotiation. And if you don't think about the total value of the deal that you're trying to create, it's not just a transaction. Get out of the transaction mindset. What value am I creating for this organization? In fact, earlier on today, I was having a discussion with someone where we were talking about belief. And it got, admittedly, it got a little bit high level within the conversation. But if you don't believe in what it is you're selling, because what you're selling you believe doesn't drive value for the organization, for your organization and the client, then you should be selling something else, because that idea is going to speak through in everything that you're doing. And if you don't believe in that, and if you don't believe in the value, just stop. Just go do something else because this is not for you. You're never going to be successful.
So belief in the mission, the values, the organization, the product. Sometimes as sellers, though, we do get into, for example, prior to starting my own company, I always worked for the underdog. So he's usually the smallest player in the market, the worst performer in the market, any of those things. Unfortunately, out of 18 years in corporate, 15 of those years were spent in the 100% Club or President's Club. And so I always liked being the underdog. I don't know why. It was a glutton for pain. I liked it. But it helped me to be able to hone in skills in terms of relationship building, right? And really understanding the individual buyer. And there were absolute times when the product was so poorly performing, when we had so many problems, and you were like, God, just keep hope alive. I hope that if I sell this, we'll be able to deliver. We're crossing fingers, right? And I think salespeople that go through those ebbs and flows behind a product, behind an organization. And even we had that here when we released Fly Message. We've had for essentially 7 months straight, issue after issue after issue after issue. And some of our own salespeople end up leaving saying, I just can't keep getting deflated on a customer call. I can't handle it. And I get it. I do get it. So how do you deal with that when you go through like the ebbs and flows that puts you in the right position to be able to properly, quote, negotiate and or ask for things?
Yeah. I would argue that you still believed in the mission of the business, though. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So you had belief. You may have not, like the product may not have been there yet, but your belief was, we're getting there. We are going to get there. I'm helping to drive forward this organization in order to be able to do that. And look, I mean, we all go through ups and downs. We all go through peaks and valleys of, full excitement and enthusiasm about what it is we're doing. But your ability to stay consistent in the things that you're doing in order to deliver based on what you believe in is going to be the thing that drives that. I often relate this to like religious experiences, right? If you have a belief in a higher being, there are going to be periods of your life where you're going to be like, I'm not feeling it, right? I'm just not feeling it. I don't know what's going on. I'm unsure about things. But if you continue to pray, you continue to read your holy book, you continue to be dedicated to what it is you're doing, you're going to be able to get through that to be able to get a whole new appreciation for the discipline that goes into that process. The same thing is true for any kind of negotiation experience that you're going through too. Your ability to stay consistent and be disciplined and focus on what it is you're doing is going to be the thing that's going to deliver your success. That's why we're called, quote unquote, negotiations ninja, because we see negotiations like a martial art, right? Martial arts or yoga or meditation or mindfulness practices are not a thing that you do to achieve an end state of perfection, because there is no such thing as perfection. All it is a practice. It's a practice of consistently applying the techniques and tools you can to be able to continually get better at that thing. But there's no perfect. You're never going to be perfect. You're going to be great. You're going to continue to be great. Wonderful. But you're never going to be perfect. And that's a harsh realization for someone who's super, super competitive, which most great salespeople are. They're super, super competitive. And so the message that I want to give those folks is, don't view negotiation as this thing that you do once, right? You read a book on negotiation and then you're like, wonderful, I've got everything that I need. No, negotiation, like discovery, like interviewing, like having conversations, like relationship building, is something that you should look at continually getting better at. It's a practice. There's no end state of perfection. And what you'll find is that the more and more that you read on the topic, the more and more you consume, the better you get, the more you realize there's so much more to know. There's so much more that I haven't uncovered yet. So don't get stuck in the trap of thinking this is like a one and done sort of idea. Integrate it as a practice into what you're doing and be disciplined. Read that book. make that prayer, do those things that you need to do, because those are the things that are going to get you through those peaks and valleys that we spoke about.
Got it. One of the questions that have been burning on my mind is related to how to access information about the other side, the counterparty, if you would. Especially if it's in procurement for large organizations, or perhaps you don't have a procurement individual, but you're negotiating directly with the buyer that you've been selling to on the technical or on the user buyer side. So what do you recommend to a seller on how to access the information about the counterparty?
There's 4 big question sets that we take people through in terms of the development of what they're doing. Number 1, focus on the questions you're going to ask the counterparty about how they can provision for your success drivers. So for example, remember at the beginning we said, well, if your major aspirational goal is to make money and selling more seats and increasing price and cross-selling and upselling are parts of how to do that, ask them questions around that's going to generate information about those things, right? What else is going on in your business where we can help? How else can we drive value for your organization? Who else do you think would be interested in that? Those kinds of questions drive more information about your specific success drivers. But then you've also got to think, well, what does the counterparty want out of this? So naturally, that's question set number 2. What questions are we going to ask that generate success for that person? And what do they want to get out of it? Question set number 3 is, what questions are they going to ask us? And then question set number 4 is self-reflective questions on how we perceive ourselves, how they perceive us, how we perceive them, and how they perceive themselves within the negotiation process as well. If I want to find out more about what makes a procurement person successful, I just ask them that question. Like, what does success look like for you? Why do you want to do this? How will your boss know if you've done a good job? How will you know if you've done a good job at the end of the year? All of those things are equally as important for a procurement person as whomever your sales counterpart is in the organization. So don't forget about asking those questions. It really drives a lot of success.
I love that. Some of the things that I've done before, especially when dealing with procurement, for example, this is a real live story here. After worked with the buyer knew what their budget was and they knew exactly how much they had to spend. And they said, this is the amount that I have to spend. This is the budget that I have. Can we do it for this price? And the answer was, yes, we can do it for that price. And here's what I would ask back though, logo, blah, 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 blah. And they said, yes, we can agree to those things. One of them I can't say for sure because procurement will probably say no to that. And I said, okay. So now we've gotten through the user experience, we've gotten through the technical component, and now buyer says, all right, so we'd like to move forward and get you in connection with both legal and with procurement. Okay, what does that process look like? So they describe the process and they say procurement is a mother lode. They are literally just a checkbox. They offer no value because I own the budget and I've already decided what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. However, you have to play the game. So here's what we're going to do. Your price point that you're going to give me, you're giving me a proposal that says it's $350,000. I can guarantee you they're going to ask for this price point discount, and then you're going to work with them and you're going to negotiate down, push back a little bit, then negotiate down, and eventually we'll get there. And so that's what we did. And in fact, procurement absolutely added no value. That they did exactly what they were designed. The playbooks for procurement said, whatever the price point is that the business negotiated, go down by 30%. That was the playbook. And this was literally in the procurement playbook that they had. So they prepped us and they told us in advance. And then, of course, when we went into the negotiations, we knew in advance that procurement would likely say no to the 3 things that we wanted, and that they couldn't do those things. And so we were coached when we hit that wall and when we got to that point, let them know that the business already agreed. And because ultimately the procurement team serves the business team, yeah. And so the business said, if we're willing to do it, we'll do that. So any case, turns out they called it exactly the way it was. We knew exactly what we were going in for. We had a proposal that was a higher price, and for basically 3 weeks we went back and forth until we finally settled on the price that we originally already agreed to with the buyer. And by the way, this buyer was somebody that had already bought from us before. So this was an established relationship, yeah, and a trusted relationship. So, any case, one of the things that threw us for the loop was something that we agreed to. We were talking about governing law or whatever it was. I forget the indemnification. We had their legal, our legal, all on the phone, and we're going through, and we all agreed to a clause in principle. And we write up the language. Comes back literally 2 weeks later is how long it took, and they denied the whole language, saying this doesn't meet the requirement, and here's what we want to do. So then I turn around and say, whoa, wait a minute. In principle, that has nothing, that's totally opposite of what we agreed to. Legal and procurement says, we never agreed to that. And I said, au contraire. So I pulled the gong recording and gave them the 3-minute clip that said, here's the language and principle from our lawyer that did a recap. And then their procurement person said yes. And then you heard me say, well, let's make sure we've got legal buy-in too. Legal, do you agree to this? And they said, in principle, if this is what we're focused on, then yes. And I said, so we don't have to deal with this, which is what they wanted to originally do. And they said, no, we can agree to that in principle. And that was it. And so then they pushed back and they said, well, just because we agreed to it then doesn't mean we're going to finally agree to it now. So it allowed us to be able to go back to the business and say, business leader, we have a problem. And so the business leader turned right back around, called up the boss of the procurement team and said, I'm not playing around with this. This is out of control. If you say you're going to agree to something, here's the recording, we agree to it. We don't go back and forth. And sure enough, we ended up getting what we wanted because procurement team got slapped down and say that the business already agreed to it. You agreed to it. It's in recording. So, but this is the type of thing that I think a lot of sales reps are missing out on is whether or not there's a back end process with the business leader, a wink, wink, this is what we're going to do. What they need to understand is, what is the procurement team like? What are their hot buttons? What will they say no to? And prepare. So you talked about being prepared earlier. That's some of the preparation, is just asking, what's the experience like? What should I be careful for? What do
they care most about? What are they going to die on the hill for? Those kinds of things are really, really important. Absolutely. I'm really sad to hear your story, actually, because number one, it makes me think that there's no trust in that procurement organization to deliver value, which it sounds like there isn't. And number two, it sounds like they are just a checkbox in that organization. And that's not what a mature procurement organization looks like. A mature procurement organization delivers a significant amount of value for large organizations. However, it sounds like in that case, it was just a checkbox. And that's sad. That makes me sad. I'm going to cry after this episode, Mario.
Oh, don't cry. Don't cry. I mean, I got more stories behind that of,
Don't tell me more of those stories, dude. I just told you I was going to cry, and now you're going to beat it into me?
Hey, man, well,
deal?
You said you make the salespeople cry. You're kind of happy and proud about that. So let me see if I can make you cry. No, but in all seriousness, regardless of whether or not there's value, you've got part of understanding the negotiation process or this process, the buying process, is you have to understand what are the hot buttons for an individual. And I think a lot of salespeople miss that mark in the process.
Yeah, one of the things that we take people through in a lot of our training, especially salespeople, is understanding what does org structure look like in procurement? How does reporting work? What are the hot button issues? What do they care most about? Where are they going to decide that you're dead in the water? What are they going to react to? And then we coach people through discovery questions that they can ask the business user to understand all of those things so that they can tie in procurement earlier into the conversation. Because if the procurement team isn't tied in earlier to the conversation, you're going to get the standard, cool story, let's get a discount. If they are tied in earlier, they can be actually way more collaborative at driving value.
Fair enough. I got one question for you, and I think I have an answer for this, but I'm curious about your answer. Do you think there's such a thing as a, quote, born negotiator?
No.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that.
There are people who are blessed with good communication skills, right? Based on how you're having a conversation with me, you're probably someone who's had really good communication skills for a really, really long time. You've gotten better at it over time, granted, as everyone does, but you were probably very comfortable having conversations from a very early age. There are those people. But, keyword, but, if those people don't practice to get better, their skill set stalls. Negotiation, as I said earlier, is like a martial art. It's like a sport, right? Yes, there are people who are gifted born athletes, but if those born athletes don't progress their skill set, that growth stops. Whereas those people who maybe weren't as blessed, if they continue to work at it, will far exceed the skill set of that person who was born with it. Tom Brady is the perfect example, right? When Tom Brady was drafted into the NFL, not so good, right? It looked rough. But by the end of his career, greatest quarterback of all time. What changed? Not the born skill set, because he didn't have that. No, it was the discipline, it was the focus, it was the dedication, it was the practice. All of that led to his ability at the end of his career. Whereas there are other people that have won the Heisman that were like, wow, this guy blows my mind in terms of a college quarterback. Unbelievable. Then they get to the NFL and it all goes to hell. Why is that? Because of the dedication, focus, and all the rest of it that goes into getting better. The same thing is true for negotiation. The good negotiators are not born. They are made. Sure, you get born with a great skill set, but you've got to use it. It's a use it or lose it thing.
Fair enough. And what if I'm a seller, I'm listening in right now, and my company does not offer negotiation training? What do I do? Does Negotiation Ninja, do you guys actually have a individual program that I can go and buy, some on-demand training programs?
Not on demand, because we don't believe that negotiation can be delivered on demand. We believe that it needs to be delivered live so that you can practice. But we do it for individuals. Absolutely. If you're an individual, the next class that we're running is in December, for example, and you get to jump in, learn from procurement people, learn from other salespeople, and run through the course with us as well.
Gotcha. Well, one day when I have a chance to get to your podcast, I'd love to tell you my Fortune, I think they were then 10, I think Fortune 10 or Fortune 11, contract negotiation, which was a $45 million contract. And it was a lot of fun. We actually did the old, all right, you're going to have to walk away. And then we did the end around and really planted an amazing seed with the CIO at the time, who helped us win the deal and basically make procurement, do we never thought about this. So it was a good one. I would love to tell you that story. But in the meantime, that having been said, a lightning round question, and that is, what is the one thing that you think a seller or sales leader can do right now, today, to be able to help them get a win-win out of their next deal?
Do you mind if I bring up something controversial?
Please. Yes, absolutely.
There is no such thing as win-win.
Oh.
It's the biggest lie that's ever been told in the negotiation world. Win-win presupposes that both of us could actually win, which is impossible, right? And even if both of us could win, you would have to know what the complete value of the deal is over the lifetime of that deal in order to divide the value evenly. But you can't know that because that's almost impossible. And even if you could divide the value of that deal evenly between both parties, you and I would have to agree on what is quote unquote fair in the negotiation. But what is fair really? Fair is based on what your perception of what fair is and my perception of what fair is. And so fair is subjective. It's not real. And even if you could agree to something that was quote unquote fair, you would need to go through the process to have complete transparency with each other. You would have to be 100% transparent with each other, which is also not possible. Now, if you said to me, Mark, well, that's not really what win-win means. Win-win means that both parties feel like they've gotten a win out of the deal. Well, actually, that makes less sense to me than the first thing. Because if it just makes you feel a certain way, then all I have to do is manipulate your emotion, which is actually fairly easy to do.
That's still a win.
So I'm just cautious about the term win-win. I think it's misleading because it puts, especially salespeople, when procurement people tell them that, procurement says, we just want a win-win. That's bullshit, right? Like sales, be very careful of that because someone's out to slit your throat, right? Like if it's incumbent upon you now to create a win for me, it's your responsibility to ensure that I get a win and that I see a deal as fair. All I have to do is tell you that's not fair. And now you're morally obligated to ensure that you achieve my idea of what fair is. Be very careful of it. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in win-lose either, because that's built on the same premise. But the philosophy behind win-win is faulty. I don't believe in it.
Okay. So what then do you call it? If it's not a win-win and it's not a win-lose, then what is it called?
Goal-based negotiation, baby. Everything that we spoke about from the beginning of the negotiation talk today, set that aspirational goal, break it down into the achievable things that you're going to negotiate into the deal, and make sure you try and achieve those things. That's your job. Your job is to drive value for the organization.
Love it. Fantastic discussion here, Mark. If anybody wants to get connected with you, is it through Twitter, X, I think it's called now, or is it through LinkedIn? What's the best way?
LinkedIn's the best way. Absolutely. Just type my name in LinkedIn. You'll find me. I'm the only one of me on there, I believe. Oh, no, there's a chef with my name in England, and I think he does some good food. So connect with him too, but also connect with me and pick up the book on Amazon, 9 Secrets to Win Deals and Influence Stakeholders.
So if you're looking to connect with Mark, obviously M-A-R-K, last name Raffan, R-A-F-F-A-N. And please, when you reach out to him, please make sure you tell him you heard him on the Modern Selling Podcast through a personalized connection request message. Don't just send something that is a blind connect request. And then, Mark, I have one last final question for you, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
My all-time favorite movie is Casablanca.
Casablanca has been on the show before. I love it. All right, then Casablanca it is. And for all of you listening in right now, hey, don't forget to download flymessage.io. Make sure that you utilize the FlyMessage AI portfolio to help you reach more buyers and engage through commenting with AI as well as post creation on LinkedIn itself. Go and download it right now, but don't turn this dial just quite yet. Listen to this very important message right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download FlyMessage, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.